The front door came off the hinges at 3:11 in the morning. I know the exact time because I have a digital clock on the nightstand that glows red in the dark, and when the sound hit, the first thing my eyes found was those numbers. 3:11. Then the shouting started. "Police! Search warrant! Everyone on the ground!" I was in bed. Boxers, a gray army t-shirt, bare feet. My brain was still 3 seconds behind my body, trying to catch up, trying to process why there were flashlight beams cutting through my bedroom like searchlights, and why someone was grabbing my arm and pulling me off the mattress onto the hardwood floor of the house I'd lived in for 5 years on Chestnut Ridge Road in Asheville, North Carolina. "Hands behind your back, now!" I'm complying. I'm not resisting. My voice came out flat, controlled. 22 years in the Army had trained that into me. The ability to stay calm when everything around you is exploding. Panic is a luxury. I never learned how to afford it. The handcuffs went on. Cold steel against my wrists, a knee in my back. My face pressed against the floor. I could smell the wood polish Celeste used every Sunday, lemon and beeswax, and I remember thinking what an absurd detail that was to notice while 2 officers were pinning me to the ground in my own bedroom. Down the hall, Ellery screamed. My daughter, 6 years old, screaming the kind of scream that turns your blood into ice water. The scream of a child who has been ripped out of sleep by the sound of her father's door being kicked in. "There's a child in the house," I shouted. "She's 6 years old. She's in the room at the end of the hall. Do not point a weapon near that room. Do you hear me?" "Sir, stop talking." "I will stop talking when you confirm that my daughter is safe." An officer appeared in the doorway. "Child is secure. Female in the room with her. Older male teenager in the adjacent room, also secure. Landon, my stepson, 17 years, old, senior year at Asheville High. The kid, who had lost his biological father when he was 5, and had spent the last 10 years slowly, cautiously, learning to trust me. And now he was watching armed men drag me out of my house in the middle of the night. They pulled me to my feet, led me through the hallway, past Ellery's door, which was open. I could see her in there, sitting up in bed, her stuffed elephant pressed against her chest, her eyes wide and wet and fixed on me. A female officer was kneeling beside her, speaking softly. "Daddy?" "It's okay, baby. Everything's okay. Go back to sleep." "Why are the police here?" "It's a mistake. It'll be fixed. I love you." They pulled me past before I could hear her response. Through the living room. Past the kitchen where Landon was standing in the doorway, in sweatpants and a Nirvana t-shirt, his face a mixture of confusion and barely controlled fury. "Brennan, what the hell is going on?" "Stay with your sister, Landon. Call Judge Whitaker. His number is on the fridge. Tell him what's happening. But now, Landon, take care of Ellery." He nodded. 17 years old and steady enough to hold it together when everything was falling apart. I'd taught him that. Not with words, but with years. Years of showing up. Years of being the man who stayed when his real father couldn't. That kid was tougher than he knew. The front door was hanging off one hinge, the frame splintered where the battering ram had hit it. October air rushed in, sharp and mountain cold. I stepped onto the porch in my bare feet. The concrete was freezing. The whole street was lit up, patrol cars with their lights flashing, red and blue bouncing off the houses, the trees, the faces of my neighbors who had come outside in their robes and slippers to watch Brennan Lockridge get arrested. Doyle Prophet was standing on his porch next door. 63 years old, retired postal worker, the kind of man who knew the name of every person on every route he'd ever walked. He was in his bathrobe, holding a cup of coffee he'd apparently had time to make, which meant either he'd been awake already, or he made coffee before curiosity, which honestly sounded like Doyle. He looked at me. I looked at him. He didn't say anything. Just gave me a slight nod, like he was saying, "I don't know what this is, but I know who you are." And then I saw Celeste. My wife was standing at the end of the driveway, near the mailbox, wearing the silk robe I'd bought her for her birthday last March. Her hair was down. Her feet were in slippers. And she was holding up her phone, recording. Not crying, not confused, not running toward me asking what was happening. Recording. She had the phone steady, both hands, the posture of someone who had rehearsed this. She was filming me being led out of my own house in handcuffs, in my underwear, at 3 in the morning, with my daughter screaming inside and my neighbors watching from their porches. Our eyes met. And in that half-second, I saw something I had been trained to recognize across 22 years of investigating liars, cheats, and criminals. I saw the absence of surprise. Celeste Lockridge was not surprised that the police were at our house at 3:11 in the morning. She was not surprised that I was in handcuffs. She was not surprised because she already knew. I didn't say anything to her. Didn't ask why she was recording, didn't accuse, didn't plead. I filed it. The way I had filed 10,000 observations across 2 decades of criminal investigations. I filed her steady hands, her dry eyes, her position at the end of the driveway where the angle was perfect for capturing the full scene, and I put it in the mental folder I was already building. The officer guided me into the back of a patrol car. The door closed. Through the window I watched Celeste lower her phone, turn, and walk back toward the house. She didn't look at the patrol car, didn't look at me. She walked with the measured steps of a woman who had completed a task and was moving on to the next item on her list. 3:11 a.m. That's when they came through the door. By 3:24 a.m., I was in the back of a patrol car. 13 minutes to dismantle a man's life. But they had miscalculated. They had miscalculated badly. The ride to the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office took 14 minutes. I spent them in silence, watching the dark streets of Asheville roll past, running scenarios in my head. Someone had filed charges against me. Someone had provided evidence. The warrant was specific enough for a pre-dawn raid, which meant a judge had signed off, which meant the evidence package was convincing. This wasn't a noise complaint or a domestic disturbance call. This was planned, coordinated, professional. And my wife had been standing in the driveway with her phone ready. The station was fluorescent bright and quiet the way police stations are at 4 in the morning. A few officers at their desks, the hum of bad lighting. A drunk arguing with the booking clerk about the location of his car keys. They led me to a processing area, removed the handcuffs long enough to take my fingerprints and photograph. Then cuffed me again and put me in an interview room. Beige walls, metal table, 2 chairs, a camera mounted in the corner with a red light that meant it was recording. I'd been in rooms exactly like this one 1,000 times, but always on the other side of the table. A young officer brought me a cup of water in a paper cup. He set it down without making eye contact, like I was contagious. "What are the charges?" I asked. He glanced at his clipboard. Fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. "I'd like to speak to my attorney. Someone will be in shortly." He left. The door locked behind him. I sat in the plastic chair and drank the water and waited. The clock on the wall said 3:47 a.m. Through the small window in the door, I could see officers moving around the bullpen, glancing toward my room, talking in low voices. One of them was on the phone, nodding rapidly, his face cycling through expressions I recognized from my years in interrogation rooms. Confusion, then surprise, then the particular tightening around the eyes that meant someone had just realized they were in deeper water than they thought. Something was happening. Something had changed. At 4:12 a.m., the door opened. The man who walked in was not who I expected. He wasn't a patrol officer or an assistant DA or a public defender. He was a detective. Mid-50s, heavy-set, with the weathered face of a man who had spent nearly 3 decades dealing with the worst of what people do to each other, and had somehow maintained a core of decency beneath the exhaustion. His badge said Parnell. His eyes said I need answers. He was carrying a folder. He sat down across from me, opened it, and started reading. I watched his face. I had spent 22 years reading faces, and Detective Clyde, Parnell's face was telling a very interesting story. First line of the file, his eyebrows lifted slightly. Professional interest. Second line, the reading stopped. His eyes went still. Then they moved back to the beginning of the line and read it again. He looked up at me, looked back down at the file, looked at me again. Then he did something I had seen 1,000 times in my career, but never from the other side of the table. He stood up, straightened his back, and his entire demeanor shifted, the way a soldier's does when he realizes he's been addressing a superior officer in the wrong tone. "Remove the cuffs," he said to the officer standing by the door. "Sir?" I said, "Remove the handcuffs, now." The officer hesitated for exactly 1 second, then stepped forward and unlocked my cuffs. I rubbed my wrists. The skin was red where the metal had pressed in during the ride. Detective Parnell sat back down, closed the folder, placed both hands flat on the table, and asked me a question that made the officer by the door take a physical step backward. "Mr. Lockridge, you spent 22 years as a special agent with the United States Army Criminal Investigation Division. You held a top-secret security clearance. You received 2 Army Commendation Medals for breaking open fraud and corruption cases involving senior military officials." He paused. "So, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Did someone just try to frame you?" The room went very quiet. The officer by the door was staring at me like I had just transformed into a different person, which in a sense I had. 30 minutes ago, I was a fraud suspect in handcuffs. Now, I was a former federal law enforcement officer with a classified file, and 2 decades of experience investigating exactly the kind of crime I'd been accused of. "Yes, Detective, someone did." "Do you know who?" "I have a strong suspicion." "Would you like to share it?" I looked at him, measured him. 22 years of reading people told me that Clyde Parnell was honest, thorough, and deeply uncomfortable with the idea that his department had just executed a pre-dawn raid on a man who had spent his career on their side of the law. "The evidence package that generated this warrant," I said. "Who submitted it?" Parnell opened the folder again. "Anonymous tip. Called in 4 days ago. Detailed allegations of money laundering through a forensic accounting business. The tipster also claimed the suspect was actively destroying evidence and preparing to flee the state, which is why the judge authorized an emergency warrant for pre-dawn execution. Supporting documentation was mailed to the department. Financial records, bank statements, client files showing fraudulent transactions. Mailed, not emailed, physical documents. Correct. Because physical documents are harder to trace digitally. Whoever sent this knows enough about investigations to avoid electronic footprints." Paused. "And the claims about evidence destruction and flight risk were designed specifically to justify the kind of raid that happened tonight. A dramatic public arrest. The kind that would be devastating to someone's reputation and custody position if, say, their spouse happened to record it." Parnell's eyes narrowed. He was following me. "May I see the evidence package?" Parnell hesitated. This was irregular. Suspects don't review their own evidence files, but I wasn't a typical suspect and he knew it. I shouldn't. "Detective, I spent 22 years doing exactly what you do. I investigated fraud for the federal government across 3 continents. I have testified in over 40 military tribunals. I can look at that evidence package and tell you within 15 minutes whether it's genuine or fabricated." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he pushed the folder across the table. I opened it. 26 pages of financial documents, bank statements, client invoices, transaction records, all supposedly from my forensic accounting business. I began reading the way I had read 10,000 evidence packages before, not for content, but for construction. Not what the documents said, but how they were made. It took me 8 minutes. "These are forgeries," I said. "How can you tell?" 3 ways. I pulled out a bank statement and held it up. First, formatting. This statement is supposed to be from First Horizon Bank, where I actually have my business account, but the header font is Calibri. First Horizon uses a proprietary font on their statements called F.H. Sans. It's a small detail, most people wouldn't notice. I noticed because I've analyzed over 300 forged bank documents in my career. I pulled out another page. Second, dates. This transaction record shows a wire transfer on March 7th, 2024, a Saturday. Wire transfers don't process on weekends. Whoever created this document didn't check a calendar. I pulled out a third document. Third, and this is the one that tells me exactly who did this. This client invoice has my business letterhead, my logo, my address, my tax ID number, but the tax ID is wrong. It's off by 1 digit. The last number should be a 4, not a 6. Someone had access to my business documents, close enough access to copy almost everything correctly, but they made one mistake. I set the documents down. Detective, the person who created these forgeries had intimate access to my financial records, my business files, and my personal information. They knew enough to build a convincing package, but not enough to avoid the mistakes that a trained investigator would catch in under 10 minutes. And you know who that person is? My wife. Parnell leaned back. That's a significant accusation. It is, and I can prove it. But first, I need to ask you something. The anonymous tip that started this, do you have the phone records? The call came from a prepaid cell phone, untraceable. Prepaid. Phones are purchased somewhere. Every Walmart, every gas station, every convenience store that sells them has security cameras. Pull the purchase records for prepaid phones in Buncombe County in the 2 weeks before the tip was called in. Cross-reference with my wife's vehicle, a 2021 white Lexus RX, plate number CLA 4471. I guarantee you'll find her on camera. Parnell was writing now, fast. Second, the documents that were mailed to your department. They were printed somewhere. Check the metadata on any digital files included in the package. If there were none, check the paper stock, the toner signatures, the print alignment. My wife doesn't have a printer at home. She uses the one at her office, Henderson and Cole Appraisal Group on Patton Avenue. That printer will have a digital log. How do you know she doesn't have a printer at home? Because I'm a forensic accountant, detective. I notice what's in my house, there's no printer. She uses mine for personal documents. These weren't printed on mine. The toner density is wrong. Parnell stopped writing, looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of a detective who had just realized he was sitting across from someone who was better at this than he was. Not an insult, just a fact. Mr. Lockridge, I've been doing this for 28 years. I've never had a suspect dismantle their own case file from the other side of the table. I'm not a suspect, detective. I'm a target. There's a difference. Why would your wife frame you for fraud? Because she's committing fraud herself, and she needed to neutralize me before I figured it out. Let me tell you about Celeste. Because this isn't a story about a man who married a monster. I didn't marry a monster. I married a woman who became one. Slowly, the way rust forms on a good piece of steel. Invisible at first, then everywhere. I met Celeste Arnault in the spring of 2014. I was 36 years old, still active duty, stationed at Fort Liberty in North Carolina, with periodic assignments that took me overseas for weeks at a time. I'd been Army CID for 17 years by then, and the work was starting to weigh on me. Not the danger, but the endless procession of people who had been betrayed by people they trusted, colonels stealing from their own units, contractors defrauding the government, marriages destroyed by secrets and lies. I spent my days swimming in the worst of human nature, and by 2014, I was looking for something that reminded me that people could be good. Celeste was a widow. Her first husband, Gavin Arnault, had died in a car accident in 2012, leaving her with a 5-year-old son and a life insurance policy that covered the mortgage, but not much else. She was rebuilding, working as an appraiser, learning the business, trying to give Landon a stable life. When I met her at a fundraiser for the local Veterans Association in Asheville, she seemed like the strongest person in the room. Not loud strong, quiet strong. The kind of strength that comes from having survived something that should have broken you and deciding to keep walking anyway. We talked for 2 hours that night. She asked about my service. I told her the parts I could tell. She asked about the parts I couldn't tell, and I told her those had shaped me more than the ones I could. She told me about Gavin, about the phone call from the highway patrol, about explaining death to a 5-year-old, about sleeping alone in a house that still smelled like her husband's cologne. I kept seeing her whenever I was stateside. Long weekends in Asheville, phone calls from overseas, the kind of slow-build relationship that military life forces on you. By 2016, I knew two things. I wanted to marry this woman, and I wanted to leave the Army to do it. 22 years was enough. I put in my retirement papers, and on October 19th, 2016, 3 months after my last day in uniform, we were married. Small ceremony, backyard of the house on Chestnut Ridge, Landon as the ring bearer, Doyle Prophet and his wife as witnesses. After retirement, I set up shop as a private forensic accountant. The skills translated perfectly. Instead of investigating military fraud, I helped small businesses and individuals uncover financial theft, embezzlement, tax fraud. Asheville was the right size for it, big enough to have clients, small enough that reputation mattered. Ellery came in August 2018, and for a while, for a few years, life was good. Not perfect. Military men don't do perfect, but good, stable. The kind of life I had spent 22 years in uniform dreaming about. The change started in 2022. Celeste got promoted at the appraisal firm. More responsibility, more clients, more late nights. I didn't question it. I understood demanding work. I had spent 2 decades doing work that demanded everything, including the parts of yourself you didn't want to give. But then the details started accumulating, the way they always do. Not big things, not dramatic revelations, just small inconsistencies that pricked at the part of my brain that had spent 22 years being paid to notice exactly this kind of thing. A deposit in our joint account for $4,200 that didn't match any invoice from her firm. Bonus, she said. Her firm didn't do mid-year bonuses. I checked. A second phone in her purse. Work phone, she said. Her firm didn't issue work phones. I checked that too. Late nights that coincided with specific property closings. Calendar entries that were deleted and re-entered with different times. A receipt from a restaurant in Hendersonville on a night she said she was working at the office, 2 wine glasses. I noticed all of it, filed all of it. And I did what I had been trained not to do. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Because she was my wife. Because I loved her. Because the same instincts that had made me one of the Army's best investigators were the same instincts I had, deliberately, foolishly, turned off when I came home every night. That was my mistake. The only mistake I made. I trusted her more than I trusted myself. At 6:15 a.m., while I was still at the station working through the evidence with Detective Parnell, my phone rang. Judge Whitaker. Brennan, I just got a very alarming phone call from a very alarmed 17-year-old. Are you in custody? Was. They removed the cuffs about 2 hours ago. I'm at the sheriff's office, but I'm not under arrest. The charges are fabricated. I'm working with the detective to unravel it. You're working with the detective at the station where you were just arrested. A pause. Only you, Brennan. Only you could get arrested at 3 in the morning and be consulting by 5. Can you get down here? I'm going to need legal representation when this moves forward. I'm already in the car. I'll bring coffee. The real kind, not whatever they serve in that building. Judge arrived at 6:40 a.m. with 2 large coffees from the Summit on Biltmore Avenue and a legal pad he'd already started filling with notes based on what Landon had told him on the phone. He was 61, silver-haired, the kind of Southern lawyer who called everyone son and darling, regardless of age or gender, and who had a mind like a bear trap wrapped in a velvet glove. Detective Parnell, Judge said, extending his hand. I'm representing Mr. Lockridge. I understand my client has been busy dismantling your case from the inside. How's that going? Parnell almost smiled. Your client is very thorough. He's Army CID. They train them to be thorough the way they train surgeons to be precise. He turned to me. Walk me through it. I walked him through everything. The forged documents, the formatting errors, the weekend wire transfer, the wrong tax ID, my suspicion about Celeste, the prepaid phone, the printer logs. Judge listened, taking notes, nodding at specific points. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at Parnell. Detective, my client has provided you with a roadmap to the actual criminal. I assume you'll be following it. We've already started. I have officers pulling security footage from Walmart locations within a 20-mile radius. We're subpoenaing the printer logs from Henderson and Cole, and I've requested a trace on the prepaid phone's call history." "Good." Judge turned to me. "Now tell me the part you haven't told the detective yet." "What part?" "The part about why your wife is framing you, not the how, the why. What is she hiding?" I took a breath. "I believe Celeste has been involved in a real estate appraisal fraud scheme, inflating property valuations on specific transactions to benefit a third party. I've noticed financial irregularities for months, but haven't had time to fully investigate." "Who's the third party?" "An attorney named Vaughn Tillery, estate and property law. His name has appeared on closing documents for at least 4 properties that Celeste appraised in the last 2 years. The appraised values on those properties were significantly higher than comparable sales in the area." "How significantly?" 20 to 40%. On properties worth between $800,000 and $1.5 million. That's a spread of $160,000 to $600,000 per transaction. Parnell was writing again. "You're saying your wife has been committing the exact crime she accused you of." "I'm saying she's been committing the crime, and when she realized I might figure it out, she decided to put me in a cage first." "The best defense is a good offense," Judge said quietly. "Frame the investigator before he can investigate." Classic. "Except she forgot one thing," I said. "I'm very good at what I do." By 10 a.m., the case had inverted completely. Parnell's team pulled security footage from the Walmart on Tunnel Road, showing Celeste purchasing a prepaid phone on October 3rd, 11 days before my arrest. Her white Lexus was clearly visible in the parking lot. The timestamp matched the purchase receipt recovered from the store's records. The print logs from Henderson and Cole showed that 28 pages of documents had been printed on the office's Xerox machine on September 29th at 9:47 p.m., well after business hours. Celeste's keycard had been used to enter the building at 9:31 p.m., and then Maren Stokes called back. I had called Maren at 7 a.m. She was still active CID, stationed at Fort Liberty, and she owed me a favor from a case we'd worked together in 2015, involving a procurement colonel who had been skimming contract funds for 6 years. Maren had found the paper trail. I had testified at the tribunal. The colonel got 12 years. Maren said she'd owe me for the rest of her career. I told her I'd never collect. I was wrong. "Brennan, I ran the name you gave me. Vaughn Tillery. He's not just an attorney." Maren's voice had the controlled intensity I remembered from our years working together. "He was investigated by the North Carolina State Bar in 2019 for suspicious closing practices. The investigation was dropped for insufficient evidence. But the file is still open. And here's the interesting part. He's connected to a network of shell companies registered in Delaware. 3 of them have received wire transfers from accounts associated with Henderson and Cole Appraisal Group in the last 18 months. How much? Total across the 3 shells? $1.4 million, give or take. 14 transactions. $1.4 million. My wife and her partner had been running a fraud operation under my nose for nearly 2 years, and when I got too close, they tried to bury me under the exact crime they were committing. I gave Maren's findings to Parnell. He contacted the State Bureau of Investigation. By noon, the SBI had opened a formal investigation into Vaughn Tillery and Celeste Lockridge. At 2:15 p.m., I drove home. I had been gone for 11 hours. 11 hours since they had dragged me out of my bed and put me in the back of a car. 11 hours since my daughter had screamed, and my stepson had stood in the hallway trying to hold the world together, and my wife had stood in the driveway recording my humiliation on her phone. I pulled into the driveway. The front door had been temporarily repaired, plywood where the frame had splintered. Doyle Prophet was on his porch. He raised his coffee cup in a silent salute. I nodded back. I walked inside. Celeste was in the kitchen, pacing, phone in her hand. She was expecting me to be in jail. She was expecting a phone call from a booking clerk, a bail hearing, a process that would take days and give her time to prepare her next move, file for divorce, claim the house, petition for emergency custody, paint me as a criminal while the charges hung over my head. Instead, I walked through the door. She froze. The phone stopped mid-pace. Her face went through a rapid sequence of emotions that I cataloged the way I had cataloged 10,000 faces in interrogation rooms across the world. Surprise, confusion, fear, and then, underneath all of it, the particular stillness of a person who realizes that the trap they set has just closed on their own leg. "You're home," she said. "How are you home? They arrested you." They did. The charges were fabricated. The evidence was forged. The detective figured it out. Or rather, I figured it out and the detective agreed. She said nothing. Her grip on the phone tightened. "You should call Vaughn," I said. "Tell him to get a good lawyer. He's going to need one." I paused. "And Celeste? So are you." She stared at me. I stared back. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of shared meals and shared beds and shared silences, and a daughter sleeping down the hall who had my eyes and her mother's stubbornness. 8 years, and I was looking at a stranger. "Brennan, I don't know what you think." "Don't." I held up my hand. "I spent 22 years listening to people lie to me. Soldiers, contractors, generals, criminals in 4 countries and 3 languages. I have heard every kind of lie there is, and I can see every one of them on your face right now." She sat down, not because she chose to, but because her legs gave out. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten breakfast that morning, where Ellery had spilled orange juice and laughed about it, where Landon had complained about his calculus homework, and she put her face in her hands. "How much do they know?" she whispered. "Everything. The shell companies, the inflated appraisals, the $1.4 million, Vaughn's state bar investigation, the Walmart footage, the printer logs, all of it." I was going to stop. We were going to stop after the next. There's always a next one, Celeste. That's how fraud works. You don't stop because you can't stop because every transaction creates evidence that the next transaction is supposed to bury. I've been explaining this to criminals for 22 years. I never thought I'd be explaining it to my wife. She looked up. Tears now, real ones, not the performed grief of the driveway. "What happens now?" "Now, the SBI builds their case. They'll arrest Vaughn first, probably within the week. You'll be next. Judge Whitaker will represent me in any proceedings related to the false charges, which will be dismissed. And then we'll deal with custody. Brennan, please. Ellery, Landon." "Ellery and Landon are my concern now, not yours." "Landon isn't even yours legally. He's my son." "Landon is 17 years old. In this state, he can choose where he lives, and we both know who he's going to choose." That landed. I saw it hit her like a physical blow, because she knew I was right. Landon had lost one father at age 5 and had spent 10 years building a bond with another. He called me Brennan, not Dad, because we had agreed early on that his father's memory deserved that respect, but he came to me when he needed advice. He sat with me on the porch when he was upset. He asked me to teach him to drive, to help him with his college essays, to show him how to change the oil in the old Jeep I'd bought him for his 16th birthday. Celeste was his mother, but I was his anchor. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know." I didn't want it to go this far. Vaughn said the anonymous tip would just create enough confusion to buy us time. He said you'd be released on bail within a day and the charges would eventually be dropped. He said, "Vaughn said what he needed to say to keep you compliant." That's what people like Vaughn do. They use people. I looked at her. "He used you, Celeste. The same way he used those shell companies and those inflated appraisals. You were a tool. And when you stopped being useful, he would have discarded you. I've seen it 100 times." She didn't argue. Maybe because she knew I was right. Maybe because she was too tired to fight. Or maybe because somewhere underneath the fear and the guilt and the desperation, there was still a small piece of the woman I had married, the woman who had survived her husband's death and raised a son alone and rebuilt her life from the ground up. And that woman knew that what she had done was unforgivable. I left the kitchen, went to Ellery's room. She was sitting on her bed with Landon, who was reading to her from a picture book about a bear who goes on an adventure. She looked up when I walked in. "Daddy, are you okay?" "I'm okay, sweetheart." "The police broke our door." I know, I'm going to fix it. Landon stayed with me the whole time. He said everything would be fine. I looked at Landon. He looked back at me. There was a conversation in that look, the kind that doesn't need words. I'm proud of you. I know. Are you okay? I will be. What's going to happen? I'll handle it. Thank you, Landon, I said. Yeah. He closed the book. Brennan, can I talk to you later, alone? Of course. That conversation happened on the porch that evening, after Ellery was in bed. October air, mountain dark, the sound of crickets and the distant hum of I-26 through the valley. She did this, Landon said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She tried to put you in prison. Yes. He was quiet for a long time. 17 years old, processing the fact that his mother had tried to destroy the closest thing he had to a father. That's a weight no teenager should have to carry. But Landon carried things. He'd been carrying things since he was 5 years old, and his mother told him Daddy isn't coming home. If you have to go somewhere, like if there's a custody thing and she tries to take me, I want to stay with you. That's your choice, Landon, and I'll support whatever you decide. I just decided. Okay. And Ellery should stay with you too. She's safer with you. I know. More silence. Then quietly, you know I don't call you Dad. I know, and I've never needed you to. But you are. You know that, right? Whatever happens with her, whatever she did, you're my dad. You have been for a long time. I didn't say anything, couldn't. Something was happening in my chest. Something that 22 years of military discipline hadn't prepared me for. I put my arm around his shoulders and we sat there on the porch in the dark. Two people who had chosen each other, and that was enough. The arrests came 10 days later. Vaughn Tillery was picked up at his office on Haywood Street on a Tuesday morning. The SBI agents walked him out past his secretary, his paralegal, and two clients who were sitting in the waiting room. He was charged with 14 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Celeste was arrested the following day, at the house. I made sure Ellery was at school and Landon was at a friend's house. I didn't want them to see it. I had seen enough people get arrested in my career to know that the image never leaves you, and my children had already seen more than they should have. She went quietly, didn't resist, didn't cry, just held out her wrists and let the officer put the cuffs on. She looked at me, standing in the hallway, and said, "Take care of them." I will. Both of them. I always have. The trials took 8 months. Vaughn Tillery fought every charge with the team of attorneys who billed more per hour than most people make in a day. The evidence was overwhelming. The shell companies, the inflated appraisals, the wire transfers, the $1.4 million in fraudulent proceeds, 7 years federal prison. Celeste pleaded guilty. Her attorney negotiated a deal in exchange for full cooperation and testimony against Vaughn. 4 years federal prison. She'd be in her late 40s when she got out. Ellery would be 10. Landon would be 21. The false charges against me were formally dismissed 3 weeks after Celeste's arrest. Detective Parnell called me personally. "Mr. Lockridge, I owe you an apology. My department raided your home, based on fabricated evidence, and I'm sorry. You followed procedure, Detective. You got a warrant based on what appeared to be credible evidence, and you executed it. The failure wasn't yours. The failure was that someone who knew me well enough to build a convincing frame didn't know me well enough to know it would never work. For what it's worth, you're the most impressive person I've ever arrested. I'd prefer not to make it a regular occurrence." He laughed. First time I'd heard him laugh. Fair enough. Custody was straightforward. Celeste, facing federal prison, couldn't contest. I was awarded full custody of Ellery. Landon, at 17, filed a declaration stating his preference to remain in my care. The court granted it. He turns 18 next month in May, and after that the legal question becomes moot anyway. He's staying because he wants to, not because a court told him to. 6 months have passed since that night. It's April 2025 now. The door is fixed. Not the plywood patch from that first morning. A proper door, solid oak, with a deadbolt that I installed myself. Doyle Prophet watched me install it from his porch, offered unsolicited advice about hinge placement, and brought over a six-pack when I was done. "Looks good," he said. "Thanks, Doyle." "Brennan?" "Yeah?" "That morning, when they brought you out in handcuffs, I knew it wasn't right. I've lived next to you for 5 years. I've watched you mow your lawn, fix your gutters, teach that boy to drive in the cul-de-sac, carry your daughter on your shoulders to the mailbox. I know who you are. I appreciate that. And I knew about her." He took a sip of his beer. "I'm a retired postal worker, Brennan. I know who gets mail at every house on this street. Your wife was getting letters from a law firm on Haywood Street, 3 or 4 a month, for over a year. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my business, but I knew something wasn't right. You're a good neighbor, Doyle. I try. Landon is finishing his senior year. He got accepted to UNC Asheville, wants to study criminal justice. I told him he was out of his mind. He told me he wanted to be like me. I told him to be better than me. He said he'd try. Ellery is in 1st grade. She drew a picture last week of our family. Me, Landon, herself, and our dog, a beagle named Colonel that I got from the shelter in January because the house felt too quiet without someone making noise. Celeste was not in the picture. When her teacher asked about it, Ellery said, "My mommy is away, but my daddy and my brother are here, and Colonel. I visit Celeste once a month. I bring photos of the kids, updates on school, Landon's acceptance letter. I do this not for her sake, but for theirs. Because someday Ellery will be old enough to ask questions, and I want to be able to say I didn't cut her mother out of her life. I let her make that choice herself when she's ready." Celeste cried when she saw Landon's acceptance letter. "He's going to be amazing," she said. "He already is. Because of you. Because of himself." She looked at me through the glass. "I destroyed us, didn't I?" "Yes." "Was there ever a moment when you didn't see it? When you believed I was just your wife and nothing was wrong?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. There were years when I believed that, the early years, before the deposits and the second phone and the late nights. There were years when I came home, and the house smelled like dinner, and Ellery was laughing and Landon was arguing about homework, and you were standing in the kitchen with a glass of wine, and I thought, this is it. This is what I served 22 years for. This is what I earned. And now? Now I know that what I earned, I still have. It's in the other room doing homework. It's in the backyard throwing a ball for a beagle named Colonel. It's in a house on Chestnut Ridge Road with a brand new front door and a neighbor who brings beer and unsolicited advice. She almost smiled. You always were the strongest person I knew. I'm not strong, Celeste. I'm trained. There's a difference. I'm sitting on my porch right now. The same porch where Landon told me he was my son. The Blue Ridge Mountains are turning green again after a long winter. Colonel is asleep at my feet. Inside, I can hear Landon helping Ellery with her reading homework, sounding out words, being patient the way I taught him to be patient, the way the Army taught me, the way life teaches everyone eventually if they're willing to learn. The police broke down my door at 3:11 in the morning. My wife stood in the driveway and filmed it. She tried to put me in prison for a crime she committed. She tried to take my children, my home, my freedom, my name. She failed. Not because I'm smarter than her. Not because I'm tougher or luckier or more powerful. She failed because I spent 22 years learning one thing. The truth is patient. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to rush. It just needs someone who knows how to find it and refuses to stop looking. I found it at 4:12 in the morning, sitting in a police station in my boxers and a gray Army t-shirt, reading forged documents with a detective who had the decency to listen. And the truth set me free. Just like it always does. Now, I want to ask you something. What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world called the police on you at 3 in the morning? If you were dragged out of your bed in handcuffs while your child screamed and your neighbors watched? Would you panic? Would you rage? Would you break down? Or would you stay calm, sit in that chair, wait for the file to open, and let the truth do what the truth does? And here's the deeper question. Have you ever been falsely accused of something? Has someone ever tried to destroy your reputation, your family, your life with a lie? And did the truth come out? Or are you still waiting? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reached you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, especially someone who's been accused of something they didn't do and is wondering if the truth still matters. It does. I promise you. It matters more than anything. Comment your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story. I'll see you in the next one.